Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm trying to get some of these hoses hooked up for the cooling portion of the aircraft. This is actually, I'm going to need help on this one. So the AN adapters are push-on adapters, and the tolerance with the hose is extremely tight. I can get them over about the first notch, but getting them over the second one is pretty much impossible. I did some searches around on the internet and found that there's actually some tools for doing this, but I only have 8 ends that I need to connect, and the tools run in the range of $500 to $800. So I've got some feelers out with some of the local builders here in town, and if push comes to shove, I'll probably stop by a couple specialty shops and see if I can get somebody to help get these put on correctly. Oddly enough, I mean, I got one, and I'm just trying to turn the hose there, and I needed something to just kind of keep it in place. But the hose wouldn't even turn after I got it on that first rung. So, but like I said, I'm gonna have to stop by a shop or something like that and see if I can have somebody that has the proper tools to be able to actually get that connection on there. It's definitely not easy, so I've set this aside for right now, and we'll get it done. So I'm not too worried about it. Anyway, so after I got that done, it's back to work on the firewall forward section here. Now that I've got the avionics in the airplane, the 4 and 6 here are basically the gauge of the wire to run from through the battery to the starters and the starter solenoid, the master solenoid, or contactors. The other thing that I needed to do was come up with a mount for the circuit breaker box that goes actually mounts on the actual firewall. Because I'd moved the Rotex fuel pumps over for the fuel system, if you go back and look at how I've done that, I didn't have room on the firewall to mount the circuit breaker box that came with the Midwest stuff in the traditional position. Plus, I had 2 extra holes in the firewall that were meant for other wiring. This is another sling builder that stopped by to check it out. He just got his kit a couple weeks ago and just finished up inventory, so he's looking at what he's got to get involved with here. But stopped by for a little bit. Retired ATC, super nice guy. So anyway, so I had to come up with a mount for the circuit breaker box for the front, and also figure out a way to cover up the hole. There's a picture a little bit later on that shows you what the final product looked like. But what I wound up doing was using the existing riv nuts that I had on the firewall to mount a plate that would then help offset just slightly the circuit breaker box and give me a location to mount it. So it actually, I think it worked out pretty well. I put some firewall sealant around the holes that it covered up, and I think it works pretty well. It gives me a little bit room from where it needs to go, and I don't know. The only thing I guess I haven't tested it with is the oil reservoir, but we'll check that here shortly. So at this point in time, it's just a matter of kind of going through the flow chart of what goes in to goes out of, and get the leads terminated, and figure out what's going on. So this is the circuit breaker block. So also the bold letters there are jumpers, and you'll notice there's a sheet number. It's not actually sheet; it's page. There's everything's sheet 1, but there's the jumpers don't reference the page. They refer or they That's what you're supposed to go to. It's just not well. I don't think it's labeled quite right, but figured it out. Anyway, so everything at this point in time is I'm just kind of closing up a lot of stuff. Since I got the brake lines pretty well squared away, I've got to do some dressing on the lines. But I've been having to gingerly step in the back, and there's really no reason for me to need to do that anymore. There's nothing that's going to go in these sections, and the floor plates are meant to be permanently installed. So I was like, okay, well, it's time to do this. And again, every time I close a section out, it just things seem to feel a lot more final. So, because there's the only way to get back in here is to go through and drill all the rivets and take it out. And so anyway, I mean, it's just a matter of getting the plates together. The one thing that I found out was one of the rib nuts, for whatever reason, I'm not sure what happened, but I never actually squeezed it. So when I went to go put the last plate in that screws in place, it just sit there and spin because it didn't have anything to hold it back. So I had to go back and, of course, it was below the plate that I'm putting in right now. But fortunately, I had access to it, and I was able to drill it out and put a new one in. So it's set in there now. And those plates are basically it's an inspection plate that covers up the bolt for the landing gear. So I'm just working through that process now. Got both sides done. If you see that little opening there to the left where the angle's at, that's where that inspection plate is at. And I torqued that value down and put some torque seal indicator on that bolt. So after I got the plate or the floor plates done there, and I could safely get in there without tripping over clecos or anything like that, it was time to get the wiring for the canopy lights together. So the one thing that I did do also is I ran 2 sets of wires. Basically, there's a spare. It was a whole lot easier to run a spare on the initial or the canopy install. If you go back and take a look at that video. It was easier to do it at that point in time because if I need an extra set of wires or something like that, that would have been the time. So basically, I trimmed those down a little bit, and now I'm separating the wires to be able to make the connections. Because I do have the IntelliKey system on this, I had to make sure that I got everything terminated correctly because the lights that are set to glow with the IntelliKey had to be wired with the correct wires itself, and so that basically double check and make sure this is me checking the wiring here, make sure that I've got everything terminated correctly. But the good news is that once I got it all terminated, a little spoiler alert, I have tested them and everything seems to be working correctly. So I'm just using the soldered, I forget what they call them, but there's these little tubes that have a little bit of cool solder that it's in it, and you put the wire in from each end, and it does this really great job of melting the solder and then heat shrinking around the wire, so it seals the wire up real nice. It does take a little bit of a rub your head and pat your belly kind of thing because the wires have to stay together while you're holding the heat gun on it. And the other funny part is so that heat gun is one of the ones that was recommended from Build Fly Go, I think it was. So I got it, and then after I got it, I realized that I already had a heat gun, and then I had a friend of mine pass away a couple years ago, and I also had his heat gun, so I got lots of heat. But I'm using the one that's adjustable. It actually works out pretty well. So I'm not, at this stage of the game, I'm not being too concerned about tidying the wiring up. I want to get everything tested, make sure it works before I go through and clean everything up. I was able to get the fuse or the circuit breaker box all put together. You may have noticed in this picture here, I'm missing one 15 amp circuit breaker, and that has arrived at this point in time. So I have all 4 circuit breakers in there. I also need to come back and do a little bit of cleanup. The headphone jack wires were interfering with the flow of the elevator, and so I had to work that out. And I'm running it's really really tight in the wiring and all the hoses and everything that needs to run through that section. So I think I've got them run correctly, but I mean, we'll find out. So I also needed to get the plugs for the wiring harness for the wings mounted, and I hadn't done that, and so that part's done at this point in time. This here is so the outside air temperature The way Midwest has it initially wired, at least for my harness, I think they may have changed it. The outside air temperature was meant to go in the NACA duct on the side of the airplane there. But reports are that there's not getting good temperature readings in that location. So what I wound up doing was running, and Aaron, who was here in the last video, said he moved his down to the root of the wing, and so I went ahead and just basically put a big long extension on the wiring that's from where the outside temperature was meant to be plugged in, and this is just, I'm moving it outside the airplane. So it'll go on the right wing when I get that mounted, and there is a connector that goes on the end of it. So it won't take very long. Basically, I just have to determine where I want to put it on the wing, pop a hole in that location, mount it, and then connect the wiring. With all the wiring, there's lots of small braided wire that gets left over, and you can see I've got the lights mostly wired. I hit one of them and it detached from the connector, so I've got to come back and fix that. But I'm trying to be very conscious about making sure things get cleaned up, because I don't want to introduce any sort of connection where there shouldn't be with wire fraying that goes on. And you get a lot of that with the RF cables that are here. I was really honestly dreading this part, because getting these connectors on sometimes can be challenging. It actually went fairly smooth. I think I only had a couple of issues getting this taken care of. The one thing that kind of stinks is I bought some additional tips, and the tips don't fit the connectors. So every time I opened up a package, if I didn't get it crimped just right, I had to get a whole new package. I've got to figure out if I can find some tips that actually fit. So that's it for right now. Obviously, still continuing on. I'm making what I feel like some really good progress at this point in time. Hopefully we'll start seeing actual more bigger parts go onto the airplane. But subscribe and share, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.